Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today I think we're going to go to Florida, but I haven't checked exactly where my guest is. The last I saw, it was in Prague, and that must have been over 30 years ago. My guest, I'm extremely interested in having a conversation with Martin Paluš, who was the Czech ambassador to the United States and the Czech representative to the permanent representative to the United Nations. Now I think he's teaching at a university in Florida. So good morning, Martin. How are you?
First of all, right now I'm in the Czech Republic. I'll be on the way to Miami on Tuesday next week. So for me it is 6:30 p.m. Right. Sun is now going down and it's a beautiful weather here. So I'm in the Czech Republic.
Oh, okay. Where are you in the Czech Republic? You would say Prague if that's where you were.
Well, Prague is a place where I was born and living in Prague, but right now in southern Bohemia, in our house in the countryside, and the beautiful weather here. We have an end of May, so you can imagine how beautiful this can be. So I'm 90 miles or 80 miles south of Prague, and this is my niece,
hello, niece. Hello,
my granddaughter. My granddaughter.
Your granddaughter. Hi. What's her name?
Theodora.
Hello.
Theodora.
Hi.
Theodora.
Hello, Theodora. Hi. How are you? Hello. Do you speak English? Do you live in the U.S. also?
No. You know, she'll be 3 in September. So she's a very curious and very communicative, young, beautiful lady. Okay. But she doesn't know what we are doing now here.
Okay. Well, you make Granddaddy behave. All right. May I talk to you? May I speak with your grandfather pretty soon? Good.
I have a grandson too, but he's not here. He will be 4 years in the next month.
Well, when I met you, I don't think you had any children, but you might have. I didn't know you that well. Last time I met you, I think I can remember the occasion. I believe a group of us went to a bar someplace where people write their names on the wall. It has to be a unique bar. I never saw a place before where especially if you're famous. So all of the Charter 77 people had written their names on the wall. Do you remember that?
Actually, I'm not sure that I do, because there was the only wall where people were ready to put their signatures on. Was this so-called Lennon wall in Malá Strana. That is still existing there. It was I would say, iconic place of young people who started independent peace movement in just 1 year before the revolution. So it's very important always to find out or realize under which circumstances in which I would say world constellation we are meeting, because for me, what was before 1989 was very different world from what has come after our Velvet Revolution of 1989 and so-called process of transition from A to B, from, let's say, totalitarian communist system to democracy or whatever we have at this moment.
Right. Well, I certainly remember the transition very well because I was there shortly before and then again afterwards. And in fact, I think the last time was this, we went to a bar, and I remember the occasion because a Canadian woman named Jennifer Simons had put up a lot of money to hold a conference there in Prague. And it was definitely after the Velvet Revolution, because I remember being really quite shocked at some of the changes that I was seeing in the Czech participants, because in the meetings, everybody was talking about how they really had to get into NATO very, very quickly. And everybody was enthusiastic. And I stood up and I said, I thought I knew you guys. What are you talking about joining NATO? I was still very firmly opposed to NATO in those days. I think it'd be harder now to take a strong position because of certainly what's going on in the war. But at the time, that was would have been definitely shortly after the Velvet Revolution, because, or maybe a year or so, because there was suddenly a great deal of interest in joining NATO. We can talk about that or anything else, but first let me ask you about you mentioned that you have I don't know whether it's a new book, but you have written a book about the transition. And I wrote a chapter I edited a book on separatism, which had a chapter about the breakup of Czechoslovakia. And that chapter was co-authored with, he and I wrote it, Peter Pittart, who became then the prime minister of the new Czech Republic. And but my memory of all of that stuff is much hazier now because I'm 90 and I don't remember much about it. But it refreshed my memory by telling me a little bit about your book, about that transition.
Look, I'm also aging person, just to be quite concrete. I'll be 72 in the fall of this year. So I'm in the stage of life when people try to wrap things up and make some sort of balancing what I've been doing and the evolution of my thinking. For me, and Mary Calder was always making fun of me because in our current discussions, I always had a tendency to end up with Aristotle or arguments going very way back in time. So what I put together, selection of texts, I wrote in the course of time. So it is some sort of autobiography, but not that I'm now writing what I remember about the past, but looking at the texts I wrote in the past and trying to speak myself through these texts. So I put together 14 texts, some of them written way back before 1989, up to my reflections from very recent period of time. The title is Once Upon a Time of Transition. Mm-hmm. And the subtitle is 14 Exercises in Political Thought.
Are these 14 different chapters in the book?
14 chapters, 14 essays.
Okay.
But I hope that they are not just essays. When you write essays, you have certain concrete reason to do it in certain moment. But these essays create some sort of message that I would like to offer to the readers or to partners in dialogue now. Mm-hmm. When I'm almost 72 years old, in the year we are living in a very different world from the situations I remember in my life. So before 1989, obviously, I was a dissident. I was a spokesperson for Charter 77. I was participating in all sorts of discussions within our own tribe in Czechoslovakia, but also internationally. Obviously, the communication between Western, I would say, peaceniks and us who were, I would say, rather on the side of human rights was very important. Early 1980s, these dialogues started in this period of time. And
well, that's of course when we met, because there was a big ferment there, and Prague was really the center of that movement.
Well, but I think that this is still today quite important question. Are we on the side of human rights or on the side of peace? Or are these two things, I would say, not well connected? I can imagine all sorts of forms of peace that were hard for us in the period of Husak's normalization. Or is it something that can be put together through the means of dialogue, that people see things from their own perspectives, but still there is some deeper motivation that keeps them together, that gives them reasons and opportunity to talk about things. So
It is
today,
so crucial. Exactly the most important question. Matter of fact, yesterday I had a conversation with two people who were leaders in nonviolence, and we talked about the difficulty right now that I see if I were a Czech, if I were a Ukrainian today, being under bombardment, what in the world, as a peace activist, would I say or do? And I don't know. How to behave when you're being occupied by a foreign power is one thing. And that I can see using nonviolent civil resistance very effectively, as in fact it was during the Prague Spring. There were many people doing civil resistance. But when you're actually being bombed, I don't know how to use it.
look, that Czech or Czechoslovak experience of the past now comes back to the current discussions. You have a Munich agreement and so-called appeasement, saving peace of our times. Prime Minister Chamberlain, and I don't want just to use this traditional Czech rhetoric against him, because it was obvious that in 1938, 20 years after the end of this horrible First World War, or Great War, how it was called, the question, are we going to send again our military to these horrible situations that First World War was? But it was very clear that appeasement with Hitler was not a real appeasement, that it was only postponement of the war that started 10 months later by the aggression against Poland. So you have this experience, and you can ask question, President Beneš decided to yield. President Zelensky said no to that and was ready to fight in spite of all the adversities, weaker side against stronger side. But now we see that the Ukrainian resistance is a significant factor. And then another Czechoslovak experience, 68. So you have, I don't want to be, I would say, anti-Russian, but this thinking of those leaders of empires, empires not having borders, but just zones of influence, and their belief that they can manipulate with smaller nations that they believe are part of the zone they should be controlling. So my 68 experience is something, and it's not only mine, my whole generation, and everyone today comes back when we want to understand what's happening in Ukraine and how eventually the world should react to that situation. And I don't want just to come up with some sort of affirmative statements, yes or no, or this should be done and it's not. But Czechoslovak history is coming back as a very important point of reference for the current discussions. And obviously, Ukraine is in the center of our discussions today.
I have to say, I can think of 1,000 things that are useful and helpful as ways of preventing wars if they're done in advance. But when the war is going on, I have very little to offer. I can't imagine how to protect people whose lives are at risk now. And but I'm spending a lot of time working on what I call a blueprint for a new world order. A little ambitious, but it sounds like the kind of thing you're doing in terms of looking back over my own history of thought and trying to see what new innovations could be adopted that would change the way governance is done, world governance is done, so as to prevent similar things in the future. And that's the most I can see ways of contributing. Is that similar to what you're doing in your 14 lessons from the past?
Well, obviously, the Czech experience is certainly one of my principal points of departure. It's not only Czech history, and Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk as the first founding president of Czechoslovakia, with his strong belief that Czech questions did need to be thought through, as he said, in worldly terms, as a world question, so that you have to put your case, in our case, Czech Czechoslovak democracy into larger scheme of things. He perceived that situation as a world revolution. He was a close partner of much more powerful politician of this time, American President Woodrow Wilson. So the Wilson's vision to make the world safe for democracy was let's say, sweet music in his ears. And then obviously miscalculations, because the years before, between the First and the Second World War, 2 decades, were maybe hopes put into certain new multilateral schemes such as League of Nations, and really the commitment that international conflicts had to be resolved by peaceful means and not by war between the parties. But it turned out that totalitarian regimes had a different vision of the world, of the future. Hitler, his own; Stalin, his own. And then we had history going on. After the Second World War, we could put our money, expectations on Charter of the United Nations, or this organization created as a reaction to the war, with P5, five now permanent members of the Security Council, and all other states, and their concept of equal sovereignty, and guarantees that, again, international conflicts were supposed to be resolved by peaceful means. It was for us Czechs, or Czechoslovaks, and other nations of our part of the world, a little bit bittersweet result. On the one hand, the bipolar architecture of the world was relatively peaceful, at least in Europe, in spite of all these nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction that were around. So this bipolar stability created the system that was tested for us by 1968, when it turned out that if Czechoslovaks had wanted to start something on their own, something that would have corresponded better to their national traditions, global situation turned out to be a much stronger factor than all these tendencies. So what I was writing in this thing was my reflections of that situation, how I saw it before 1989. And then obviously for us in 1989, it was a turning point. Alex Hobsbawm believed that it was the end of the short 20th century, not 89, but 91, when the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Age of extremes, and now the question was what we would have next. Fukuyama had his concept of end of history, but history didn't end, but something new started, and we could only step by step observe what was this new all about. 9/11, all sorts of crises that came after that, and obviously these changed or changing circumstances made us think, try to reflect on it and understand it. So for me, certainly Czechoslovak transition from totalitarianism to democracy, including our new position within a new emerging European political architecture, was an important thing. I still would have some, I would say, maybe critical remarks to your NATO comments made recently. First of all, just to make this clear, and I also have some reflections about that in my book, I don't think that in the very early stage of this development, anyone had idea of NATO expansion in mind. Even on the Western side, it was not very clear how this new political architecture in Europe was to be created. I guess that everyone who would like to think about that seriously should start from the reunification of Germany. The 4+2 talks that started in the spring of 1990 and resulted in October of that year with the reunification of Germany, which was a really very robust change of the world political architecture that was created after the Second World War. And then you have the role of Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe in this context. Then what to do with Warsaw?
I don't want to stop you right there, because that's what I think. We've already almost come to a disagreement, because I told you that I was, at least then, extremely skeptical about why Czechs would want to join NATO immediately after the Velvet Revolution. But the reason is that I saw the OSCE, which was then the CSCE, was the much better alternative. If we'd abandoned NATO just the same as they abandoned the WTO, and really enhanced and given some strength to the OSCE, we'd be home free now. We wouldn't have the problem that's going on in Ukraine today.
Look, I respect your, I would say, wishful thinking, but you don't want to forget some real facts. For instance, first, the coup d'etat against Gorbachev in August of 1991.
How could I forget that?
I think if you want to understand what was happening after that, and then the Russian Federation replacing the Soviet Union in the all bigger scheme of things, and Gorbachev's retirement, and Boris Yeltsin coming to power. So it was even
wait a minute, because how does that negate what I've just said about the OSCE?
Well, OSCE was in existence. It tried to institutionalize itself. Václav Havel wanted even to have a secretariat of that organization in Prague. And today you can map what is still in existence. And you know that this organization is good for something, but it's not able to do everything. So
well, that's true. But why shouldn't it have been? If we'd put our minds to it, we could have said down with NATO, because that's too divisive, and let's really put some energy into building the OSCE as the alternative, and it would be a structure that would really take care of security and would have taken care of Russia's concerns right today. I mean, I don't want to take up for on the side of what Russia has been doing, but they do have a bit of a point. Point.
What I would recommend to you is to go to concrete steps made one after another in the world that was changing before our eyes. I just mentioned this disintegration of situation of the Soviet Union and replacement of Gorbachev by Yeltsin, or Russian Federation replaced the Soviet Union. Obviously, part of that situation then is the Budapest Memorandum that guaranteed non-nuclear status to Ukraine and Kazakhstan and all of that. But on the other side of things, you had, do you know who was the first who started to use the concept of near abroad? Near abroad meaning the zone beyond the borders of the Soviet Union, Russian Federation, where the Russian security concerns are sensitive. It was Kozyrev, a foreign minister of Yeltsin, and Kozyrev was a very liberal guy. And it was the fall of 1993. And it was already in the situation when this horrible breakup of Yugoslavia was generating another round of really crimes against humanity in all, especially in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also in certain parts of Croatia, and so on and so forth. It was, I think that no one in the beginning had a clear vision of a future architecture of future political architecture in Europe. You should look at
in HCA, and you were involved in HCA too. So that's how we knew each other a little bit. And that was what we all did agree on. I think everybody in HCA would have agreed that was, at least for a while, we all agreed that that was the OSCE, or then the CSCE, was the most promising alternative. But it never went anywhere, and it shocked me that it didn't take off at all as an idea. And so the thing still exists, but it's not much of anything.
Yeah, but you have then these conflicts that might not be that, I would say, visible today, but still are ongoing, such as Nagorno-Karabakh, and HCA is very strong in this part of the world. Then in former Yugoslavia, actually, we had a meeting where I was elected one of the chairs of HCO. It was in Sarajevo, surrounded by all these tragedies that were around. So that's what I'm telling you, that certainly I would be the last who would say that civic initiatives, interest of peoples in keeping peace, because no one likes to go to the war and start killing some people on the other side. But it turned out that the structures were not resilient enough, and that they had to be, I would say that the political architecture had to be rebuilt. In the case of NATO, Brussels Summit 1994, January of 1994, with this concept of partnership for peace. By the way, Russia also was involved in that. Until today, you had at least this formal communication, NATO-Russian Federation.
Well, yes, but that was just designed as a sop, a consolation prize to keep people from being really offended. Of course, they were offended anyway, rightly so, in Russia, because they did want to join NATO, and NATO didn't want them, and wanted to give them something, a little bit of something that would make them feel better. So that's what that whole Partnership for Peace was about. I
think that I would certainly recommend to everybody to be more empirical. By the way, if we want to understand our situation today, what we can offer to Russians, I don't say to Putin, but to democratic Russians like Vladimir Kara-Murza or even Navalny, and you have all sorts of Russians, they can come to your mind in this context, where we should start or restart the debate that has been discontinued some time ago. And I think that we need to go back to the early 1990s, not because I don't want to be seen here as a NATO enthusiast, but NATO is a institution that in Article 1 has a clear connection with the principles of Charter of the United Nations. Yes. The Washington Treaty doesn't start with Article 5, but with Article 1. And so it is a rather defense organization. It's not it's not security, but defense organization with all these things, but not aggressive entity. I think that NATO's intention is not to do aggression against anyone. And we should look at the role of all these entities in concrete situations. Yugoslavia comes first to my mind in that context, and the revival of old doctrine of humanitarian intervention, because intervention not in, I would say, self-defense, but on behalf of people, individuals, civilians hit by all these horrible situations. That goes back to Grotius, to the 17th century. We know that. But obviously, in the United Nations, when I was there, it was this R2P responsibility to protect discussion. And I'm afraid that this enthusiasm reform processes started by Kofi Annan, and maybe Ban Ki-moon was quite ready to follow up on this path. Now, in the world in which we are finding ourselves in 2022, these elements are almost forgotten. They need to be revived. And this discussion should, I would say, restart, but there should be informed discussion, and rational and realistic arguments should be brought in.
Okay, I think at this point we have two things that we could talk about. And I see a branching right here. One is we could talk further about what you're just alluding to now, that is how to pick up a relationship with Russia and try to put the pieces back together now. The other is what I would consider a more ambitious view about the New World Order, a New World Order, coming out of your experience at the United Nations, where I see that we need to have a larger perspective on how to improve world governance in general. That is, fix the United Nations so it actually can do something like prevent this war in Ukraine in the future. So which do you want to talk about? What to do with Russia now, or what to do to fix the world order?
Well, I don't think that one can separate these issues, but
Okay.
it's a very old scholastic principle, distinguere sed non separare. We need to be able to distinguish between certain debates, and Russian debate is a very specific one, but it cannot be separated from a debate about the future of what you call global governance.
Well, I would let me show you how I would separate it. And then we put my ideas aside and talk about what you want to talk about. I would say in revising the United Nations or any world governance system, that what needs to happen is exactly to repair. You mentioned Woodrow Wilson and other Masaryk and people of that era, where I think that the whole flaw came with the development of the League of Nations as a place that emphasized self-determination and gave a wide open berth for nationalism to come in as being extremely important. And I think the whole notion that the United Nations consists of a union of world governments rather than a place in which the world's population of human beings as individuals has power. So if I were fixing the United Nations, and of course you can't do it in one step, but it would be to put in something like a House of the People, a parliamentary assembly, in which people are individuals elect their own representatives and participate through something like a citizens' assembly of developed by lottery or sortition, so that people actually are representing people and not states. Because I think that whole thing is coming up right now. Even the war between Russia and Ukraine now is just a war between the states. It's not a war between Ukrainians and Russians. It's between states. And if we can get rid of the dominance of states in running our world affairs, replace it with something that's accountable to human beings, then we'd be somewhere. But that's my little pitch, and it's not going to be what you want to talk about. So let's go back to what you want to talk about. You're my guest. I'm not.
Okay, I think that's what is maybe a key topic in this discussion is human rights.
Yes.
United Nations has its foundational document in Charter of the United Nations, but then there was a Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 48, and then the human rights law. All these conventions, Charter 77, for instance, is tried to use as an argument in our context of our dialogue or controversies with Czechoslovak communist government. So what you are, in my view, talking about is the fact that all human beings should be guaranteed certain basic rights, human dignity, and that all human beings are created free and equal, and that race, gender, religion should not matter, and that this equality should be universal. But obviously, it's a nice declaration, but then how to turn it into practice? International human rights lawyers, they are fascinated with the with human rights, international human rights law. So they would tell you that now Universal Declaration can be seen as an articulation of general principles of law, or that it is a customary law because all civilized nations recognize that. And that obviously totalitarians or autocrats like to use this argument of non-interference into domestic matters of states, so that they have rights to do with their own population whatever they want to do. Against that is a spirit of international human rights and all these mechanisms that should invoke the concept of international responsibility for violations of international human rights. But obviously, the question is how powerful this instrument is, because in the context of the United Nations, I think that principle of equal sovereignty is maybe more powerful than some basic human rights arguments, because it's still the states that are here to guarantee these rights. And if you have failed states or no states, as in some parts of the world, and power is in the hands of irregular militants, many places in Africa know that situation very well. So then you are putting individuals, children, women into larger, bigger troubles. So obviously, I think that the United Nations was a good platform, at least to identify these problems. But obviously, then the question was, who are the basic guarantors of international order? And you have permanent members of the Security Council, the winners of the Second World War. And then the question that emerged, not when I was in the United Nations, was already there for decades, how to reform the Security Council so that it reflects the changed realities in the world. The fact that there was no African country in this body of Security Council.
Well, the existence of the veto is even more important, although I can see why people in various countries feel rejected and ignored. But the really important thing is the fact that if the aggressor is one of the P5 or a friend of the P5, they can get away with it without any problem. And there seems to be no, I can't think of anything on the horizon that looks like it's promising as a way of curtailing that veto power.
Well, that's would be my concern. When I was for almost 5 years in New York, I participated in all these discussions concerning the reform of both the United of General Assembly and first of all Security Council. But now with the Russian Federation, as Mr. Lavrov tries to argue, I met him many times in New York because he used to be permanent representative himself, and then he was I would say, a Russian multilateralist. So I don't understand.
Well, it's one of those cases, sort of like Aung San Suu Kyi, a saint who turns into a devil overnight. He has stuck by his government, and in ways that I suppose we can understand it, but it doesn't speak well for him as a character.
Look, I in that connection, I would stand up as a, I would say, defense attorney or defender of Aung San Suu Kyi. Actually, I had in my class Madame Tida, great Burmese writer. She's now, I think, ending her stay in Harvard. She's actually helped her Czech embassy in their country to get out last year it was May, a year ago, something like that. And so she, I think, knows the situation in Myanmar or Burma very well. And obviously it's a complex situation with all these ethnicities. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not defending any wrongdoing of the government, But I think that Aung San Suu Kyi, she's now prisoner again, that she represented a very strong cause, but certain things got more complicated because it's a connection with between Bangladesh and people living in this part of that country, and now you have a very, I would say, bizarre civil war going on in that country. These generals, I would criticize generals and not Aung San
Sure,
Suu
but
Kyi.
I mean, a lot of my friends, the minute the people put her in jail and stopped her government and took over again, all of the people who had been ambivalent suddenly swung around to saying, criticizing the government and in effect defending her. But I think what she has said and done is just indefensible. That's all there is to it. And it really grieves me because I had thought she was a beacon of light, and she certainly didn't turn out to be one. Because if you look at the real situation of these poor folks,
You mean you are talking about Rohingyas?
Yeah.
Yes, but again, I am not expert in that, and obviously, this is a very complex situation. These nations are organized in their own somewhat tribal context, and you have many Rohingyas coming there from Bangladesh. It's a little. I'm just telling
don't buy
you
it.
that it is a little bit more complicated than this black-white scheme suggests. So,
sorry, I mean, you and I could get along on a lot of things, but you sound to me like an Israeli saying, well, things are so complicated that it's okay for us to go ahead and kill Palestinians. I'm sorry. I have some, there's certain human rights violations that are very clear. And the plight of the Rohingya, they're one of them. And so I don't have any, I'm very disappointed in Aung San Suu Kyi and the whole bunch of them. And of course, one has to defend her because she's now a victim again. But my God, I mean, she victimized enough other people on her own she justified what they were doing. There's no justification for what they were doing to those people. Sorry.
Okay, I don't want to get to that discussion, but I think that, again, I would strongly recommend to you to listen to people coming from Burma itself and telling you something about the situation right now there. So last thing about Aung San Suu Kyi, if you believe that her decision to join the government was wrong because she was ambitious to become a player, I don't think so. I think she tried to help Burmese transition from A to B. And it turned out that this situation, with all these complexities, geopolitical situation, difficulties of ethnic relations, and all sorts of complications, put her into the current situation. Maybe she's a well-intended person that failed in her visions, but certainly I would not.
I don't know the situation a whole lot better than you do, and maybe not as well. But it is, I think, clear that she was doing pretty good work on solving the problems with the other tribal, or maybe I shouldn't call them tribal groups, but the other 15 or so groups that comprise the non-Burman population of Myanmar. You can give her credit for some of that. And if she joined the government, there could be a good argument for that. But there can't be a good argument for the kinds of slurs that she made about Muslims, and there can't be a good argument for the kinds of definite exclusion that she made of the Rohingyas from any kind of protection that she would offer them. She justified everything the army did to them. And that's my objection. Anyway, let's go back, because we have about 20 minutes, and I'd like to have you talk about how you would like to fix the United Nations, particularly the whole notion of the Security Council, because yes, if we could get the Security Council fixed, it would be a halfway functional organization, although it would not do away with the fact that these the only people represented in the United Nations are not people, but states. And oftentimes the states are not at all compatible with the interests of their own people. So that's the thing that bugs me. Yes, and talking about it from the perspective of human rights is probably the most promising approach, because if we could just say that people have the right to human rights, and even as individuals, they should have an opportunity or structures by which they can introduce their own objections and their own complaints and their own charges against the people who are mistreating them.
Look, obviously, I don't want to be Cassandra, but League of Nations could have been created only after the war was finished and the peace was restored, and defended parties had to sign the capitulation agreements.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing can be said about the Second World War. And now the big question is, how can we imagine that this conflict that some people still hope and pray it's not a Third World War, it's a, let's say, localized conflict somewhere out there, and we need to articulate or stand firm on the side of Ukrainian victims, especially civilians. They are biggest the targets of all of that. So who should be winning in this war? I hope that civilization should be winning, but it's still quite difficult to imagine because can the reform of the Security Council be catalyzed by the fact that one of the P5 is openly turning itself into aggressor against a smaller state, when the principle of nation state, territory with recognized borders, population, and government that is capable of establishing relations with other governments is violated by the argument of empires. This is our zone of influence. So how we can restore general discussion that can be more productive and more conducive to really ideals.
Perfect question. Now, what's your answer? Do you answer it in that book?
Well, I can give you only partial answers. I think that we need to communicate with, if I say good Russians, I can give you one personification, Vladimir Kara-Murza or this Boris Nemtsov tradition. They have a foundation in Bonn. So they are Russians. They would like to be Russians and believe that Russian patriotism is not some sort of same style as Putinism. So I think that we need to talk to them.
Well, that's a great idea. I hadn't even thought about doing that. But yes, if they have an outfit in Bonn, I should get to them and ask them for an interview so we can do a talk show exactly about what their proposals would be. Sure. That's a great idea. Thank you. I'll do that. Go on.
So this is one thing. But the other thing is, and this is also something I have in my booklet. I mentioned it was a text written by Jan Patočka, Czech philosopher, first spokesperson of Charter 77.
Who is this?
Jan Patočka. There were three first spokespersons of Charter 77.
Yes.
Actually, one of the texts that was left on his desk when he passed away was a text about the end of Europe and arrival of post-European age. He was a philosopher, so I don't want to bother you with complicated philosophical arguments. He was a student of Edmund Husserl and his crisis of European civilization. And Patočka, loud and clear in 1975, said that the age of Europe, of European universalism is over, and that we need to accept the basic fact that the global community is created by, I would say, a variety of different civilizations, not only Europeans, going back to their Greek and other ancient origins, but there are others here. And the question is, what is the status of European legacy in this context? For Patočka, it was a Socrates and care of the soul, as he called that. But I think that it was a basic spirit, solidarity of the shaken.
Wait a minute. It sounds just like Samuel Huntington to me.
I know. Look, Patočka was a philosopher. Samuel Huntington is a political thinker. But what I'm telling you is that we need today to draw some conclusions from the fact that it is a dialogue between different civilizations, and that maybe the most important aspect of European legacy is that it's a dialogue, that it should be some hope and belief that there are some common grounds, common denominators, that these civilizations have something together, and that maybe this togetherness is already articulated in General Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because actually this document was not only penned by Europeans, but there were other cultures participating in its creation and discussion. So this discussion is extremely important. But
okay, well, I think that it reminds me of something I read just a couple of days ago by Andrei Kortunov. Do you know Kortunov?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I interviewed him long ago, and so we know each other vaguely. But he has a piece in which he's saying that this war between Russia and Ukraine, it's really not about this or it's not about that. It's not about territory. It's not about it's only about totally different views of how society should be organized. So basically, what he's pointing to is as if he's implying that Ukraine has decided to join Western civilization, if you will, whereas the Slavic civilization is, he doesn't use that word, but it fits in very handily with the position that I think Putin is taking about the Slavic civilization being something that he's great in defending. But that the Slavic situation is top down and authoritarian and whatnot. He gives a little description of how they differ, whereas the Ukrainians are really much more of an open society and along the lines of Western political culture. And it sounds as if that analysis fits. Now, I don't like that because, I don't really want to dislike anything that Andrei Kortunov says because I like him personally, but I think I think we have to look for universals, that there are. It's the universal Declaration of Human Rights that we have to defend. It's not the Slavic human rights and the Western human rights and the Chinese human rights is better. There's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
I fully agree and am your side in that respect. But then obviously, when it comes to forms of government, you have communitarians versus liberals in a discussion on democracy. You have this observation that modern liberal society of Western type is a society of atomized individuals that are emancipated from all these traditional structures like tribes, families, and what have you. But when you try to understand realities in Africa, in many countries in Asia, you have to take into consideration that there are some cultural differences that are important that need to be taken into consideration, so that if you impose only formal, I would say, mechanisms like election to their structures, then you get slightly different result from what you can get with all the sensitivities and questions in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in the Czech Republic, or in other countries that can be labeled as Western or European. So there are some differences that need to be recognized if you want to defend effectively universal values. I would be the last who would say that part of Chinese tradition is to do what they do to Uyghurs. That's scandalous, no doubt about that. And when you follow the arguments now coming from Beijing, it's a strange mixture of Chinese traditions. They somewhat rehabilitated Confucius. For Mao Zedong, Confucius was a reactionary thinker in the Palace of Emperor. For this current president, Xi, I think that for him, strange thing has happened. Chinese emperors were legitimate by some sort of mandate from heaven they had. I think that now the leading role of the Communist Party is almost for them like mandate from the heaven. It's something that cannot be discussed, that cannot be changed by will of humans, because it is objectively given, and you need to conform yourself with that no matter what. So
that's true of all. Isn't that true of all totalitarian states? That they want to give you the belief that their power comes from on high somehow.
Exactly. So, but this is our biggest danger in the moment of globalization, because, we want to have I would say, freedom in the world, and freedom all human beings with dignity deserve to have. But at the same time, you have the strong temptations of all autocratic leaders to abuse the fact that we have these global commons, to turn them into some sort of objective laws of nature or history, and put all individuals to the situation when people say the only thing we can do is to coordinate ourselves with that. And if someone somewhere is running debt factories or this type of facilities, maybe it's bad, but what can I do? I need to have my decent life, and maybe trying to help individuals, but the world is as it is. And so I think that we are trying to find a way how to preserve dignity and freedom in the world. And obviously we can discuss how much material needs are affecting the situation, that if you don't have basic needs served, like if you are hungry or devastated by natural condition surrounding your habitat, then obviously what can you do? You maybe start going to some other places, and all these movements.
I'm not sure how to read what you're saying. I'm not sure whether you're accepting this argument that it sounds like you will go along with the people who would say, well, either the government is given to us by the gods, or that what can we do? We're so powerless. I mean, I am so keen on supporting dissent. I've never had to be a dissident because I live in a place where I'm not persecuted, but I'm afraid that I certainly would have been out in the streets, long ago.
You misunderstood me. I exactly said what you are saying. I think that we have an obligation to help all people around ourselves to achieve these standards, to live as a free human beings, not being manipulated by totalitarian or autocratic governments. That's what we call democracy. But obviously, the democracy in the current situation is exposed to some other situations, and we have other problems. But solidarity with those who are struggling for their basic rights, who are in the situation like now, all that these individuals in Ukraine, but yes, many other places in the world where the situation
Yes,
is
absolutely.
as such. So our duty is to know about that, not to pretend that we cannot know, we live far away and maybe something else is going on. So in this respect, I'm on your side.
But we are still friends. It's been fun, and our time is up and then some. I will share this with Mary Caldor, maybe
Give
some
her
other
my
people.
best regard.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes more. This is episode number 456. You can watch these or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. And when you get to that website, look around. We have conversations going on all the time about 6 global issues and potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your own thoughts about the show. This is a place for dialogue. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through PressReader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.